One of the most common things I hear is that because Jesus ate bread, we should eat bread. So is bread a health food? Well, the United States government might tell you it is. The Bible talks about it. I'm going to give you the answer next. Hey, my name's Eddie, and I'm going to help you out with a few tips on what it means to eat bread. Is it healthy? Is it biblical? I'm going to give you all the answers. If you want to know more about some of these concepts and overarching idea and guide to health, I've got my quick start guide to health in the description. It's free. Click the link and I'll send it over to you. Okay, so bread, is it healthy? Is what Jesus ate the same as what we eat? Let's start there. No, it's not. The bread that Jesus ate is not the same bread that we eat. And so when Jesus ate bread, he ate bread that was delicious, hearty, and nutritional. We eat bread that's chewy, smells good, and delicious, but completely void of nutritional content. There are two primary differences in the way Jesus ate bread and the way we ate bread. You see, when Jesus ate bread and the people of the first century and earlier ate bread, they ate it for nutrition. They ate it because it was hearty. They ate it because it was delicious. In fact, the bread that rained down from heaven, the manna that rained down in Exodus, is noted to have some bit of coriander seed and oil. It was delicious, it was nutritional, and it was hearty. The bread we eat today is not like that. While we may think it's delicious, it certainly isn't nutritious, and here's why. The first thing to note is we grow dwarf wheat here in the United States, and dwarf wheat is 1/3 the size of regular wheat, or at least wheat that was grown back when Jesus was around. You see, when Jesus was around, wheat was incredibly tall. You remember the song, The Ember Waves of Grain, like the Star Spangled Banner? That wheat is way different than the wheat we eat today. In fact, it would be unrecognizable to wheat we grow today. The reason why we shrink our wheat is because it's easy to produce, we can make more of it faster, and it's easy to transport. None of those reasons have anything to do with nutritional value. The bread that Jesus ate was packed with zinc, magnesium, copper, and iron. Our bread does not have those things. Even if you buy Iron Kids bread, like in the 90s, right? A really popular brand. Even that bread had low levels of iron. And I'm going to talk to you in a second about why the iron that was in that bread is not even helpful for you. But the bread that Jesus ate would have been things like einkorn or emmer or even ancient sourdough strains. These breads were incredibly hearty. In fact, when they made their bread, it would have nuts and it would have seeds and it would be incredibly hearty. You would be able to bite into it and taste different flavors. And the oil they used was healthy. It was delicious, and it almost could be considered a full meal in and of itself. The bread we eat today is part of a well-balanced breakfast. You see it on a commercial, it's sitting next to a bowl of Lucky Charms with a glass of orange juice and a glass of industrial homogenized milk. Yum, delicious. That's basically prison food. It's terribly and it's nutritionally depleted. So when we produce bread in the United States, we shrink it to 1/3 of the size so it's easily transportable, but the size isn't actually the problem. The fact is, when we process the bread, it loses all of its nutritional content as well. That's the biggest part of this. And so the zinc, the magnesium, the copper, and the iron that we lose is probably the biggest part. It loses that nutritional value. 28% of the copper and the iron that's in the bread before is gone. Zinc and magnesium are almost unfindable in the bread today. So in order to get the bread smaller, in order to shrink the bread, we have to genetically modify the bread. And when we genetically modify the bread, it changes the nature of the bread. Not only does it change the nature of the bread, it harms the soil quality. And so if the soil is bad because of pesticides and glyphosate and things like that, the grain that grows out of it is not the same, and it's also shorter and genetically modified and changed, so that way when you eat it, you're not going to get the same bread that Jesus ate. So how do they make bread today? Well, first thing they do is they harvest the dwarf wheat. They remove the rocks out of it. They remove the sticks out of it. Then the berry at the end of the wheat that's in there, they don't want that to ferment or to change, which is actually really, really helpful for someone who's trying to digest it. They don't want that to ferment because they usually ferment pretty quickly. So they high steam spray it so it won't. Now these steams are at really high temperatures, and so this is a perfect breeding ground for things like mold. Mold often can grow in small amounts on the wheat as well. The endosperm is separated from the wheat, and then we take the least nutritious but the most chewy and most starchiest part of the wheat, and then we ground that into fine flour, thus removing some of the nutritional content from the wheat in the first place. So once we have that fine flour, we add things like bromates and chlorine to the flour to standardize the texture. Of course, if you have a brand of bread and it's going out to the masses, you don't want it to taste different from one loaf to the next, or even within the same loaf, so you've got to standardize it. So they use things like bromates and even chlorine to then standardize the taste across the board. Now, many of the chemicals they use to standardize the texture are banned in Europe. In fact, they're banned all across most of Eastern and Western Europe. And so if you were to go over there and you were to taste some of the bread, you'd actually notice a different taste. And you also notice you feel slightly different when you eat that bread better than when you do here worse. Now we also have to standardize the appearance of the bread, and this is where the wheat is often bleached. I know this is a controversial point for many of us, but you're not supposed to eat bleach. Bleach is not healthy for you. It's not on the government's food pyramid, let alone in any sort of functional medicine book or any diet book or any bodybuilder's weight regimen plan. Bleach is a no-go, and yet we bleach the flour we use. Now remember, all of the nutritious parts of the wheat were removed, and we've taken the starchiest but least nutritious part and ground it into flour. That's the wheat that we're going to use to make bread. But all of the nutrition is gone, and so what the government mandates is that we enrich our bread. And what that means is we synthetically place all of the nutrition back into the bread. So we inject these synthetic vitamins, the different things we talked about, the iron, the magnesium. Remember Ironkins bread? Well, that's synthetically added back into the bread because that white bread has had it removed in the first place, and so it's synthetically added. The biggest problem with synthetically adding some of the vitamins and minerals back into the bread is that our body can't digest a lot of the synthetic usage of them, and so therefore their bioavailability is incredibly low. We can't even utilize the synthetic vitamins that are placed in the bread. And so you'll see some of these breads at the store like omega-3 infused or enriched with minerals, and you go, oh, that's healthy for me. Well, your body's probably not going to be able to even use many of those minerals. Now, once that flour is enriched, it's placed into vats and containers and used to sit for months and months on end, thus accumulating more mold toxins in the bread. Now, you don't want your bread and flour to sit in ancient times when Jesus was making. You wanted to make the bread right away. But now we have preservatives in our bread, so that way we can keep it for a lot longer, and the fermentation aspect of the bread is removed, and so therefore it won't change the nature of the bread, and so it sits in vats and containers for months and months on end waiting to be made. Since now we were left with this bread, this flour that's been sitting for a few months, we notice that the bread hasn't been soaked and it hasn't fermented. Therefore, our bodies are not able to digest the bread as well as we would like. This has caused a rise in things like celiac disease, or at least bread intolerances. When we hear about gluten allergies and we think people didn't have gluten allergies 50 years ago, you're actually right. While there were certain people that did have celiac disease, the way we process bread today is almost becoming undigestible to many people. This leads things like, for sure, celiac disease, but also autoimmune conditions. Many people are developing autoimmune conditions eating bread that they actually can't digest. So what you're left with is a chlorine-filled, bleach-filled flour that has all of the nutritional and easily digestible properties removed from it, and you're getting sick from it, and you're realizing, man, bread doesn't feel healthy for me, but the government says I'm supposed to eat 6 to 12 servings of bread a day. And Jesus ate bread, and God rained down bread from heaven. Why is my bread hurting me? So what we do is we run out and go buy marketing gimmicks, and we'll go buy things like Dave's Killer Bread and John's Delicious Enriched Bread. And we buy these breads that come in these brown packages because brown is healthy. And we buy them and we think, oh, this was healthy because it has seeds and sesame seeds and all these different things, coriander seed and poppy seed all in the bread. And so therefore it must be healthy for me. But keep in mind, these are all marketing tactics to get you to buy the bread. If the bread is in an ancient grain and it is processed the way modern bread is processed, it's still going to harm you regardless of the marketing. But then comes the way they produce the bread today. What do they use to hold it together? And they use oils to hold it together. Vegetable oil, canola oil, sunflower oil, all of these different marketing oils that are added to your bread to hold it together. Now, what you need to know about these oils is that they're absolutely terrible for you. They're causing all sorts of inflammation in your body. They're increasing your risk for heart disease and other chronic diseases. They absolutely are processed terribly. In fact, much canola oil and soybean oil actually go bad in the process of making it, especially when they make it at high heats. And so what they do is they use things like bleach and chlorine to kill the rancid smell of the oil, so you can't tell it's actually bad. And what we do is we put that into the bread that we just talked about is so terrible. We make this big loaf and then we eat it and sure, it tastes good, but it's actually killing you. Okay, so does that sound like the bread Jesus ate? Of course not. This is far cry from Mary and Martha preparing Jesus and the disciples a meal in the evening with some delicious bread and from wheat that they harvested themselves. This is far different from that. This is big food and big pharma and big agriculture all coming together to produce something that will make you addicted, fat, sick, and diseased. And that is the end result of eating the bread that we eat today. In fact, it is killing us. 1 out of every 2 people in the United States suffers from a chronic disease, almost caused by diet and lifestyle choices. 100 million Americans are pre-diabetic. Another 60 million are pre-diabetic and don't know it. So there are so many people walking around sick and unhealthy because of the food that they eat, not knowing that marketing and capitalism has gotten involved in the processing of your food. So if you're gonna eat bread, here's what you need to do. You need to find ancient grains. Now these are almost sometimes very difficult to find, but you can find flour online from ancient grains. Some people still grow them at their original height and their original quality, and you can still find those, so seek those out. You can find ancient sourdough bread, which is my personal favorite, being from the Bay Area, and they make a lot of it here. You can find sourdough, you can still find emmer and einkorn and all of the different grains around. You just have to do some digging. You can even buy some of the flour in bulk online through Amazon or some of these other vendors that'll be able to get you that flour through the mail. But what I suggest is that everyone take a food sensitivity test. If you're sensitive to wheat, don't eat it at all. I would recommend a diet with no wheat, and instead of eating wheat, substitute things like sweet potatoes and rice. Hey, I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, will you give me a thumbs up? Will you like and subscribe this video? And you can do that with the subscribe button below and hit the notification bell so you can keep up with the latest updates from the channel. And don't forget to pick up the Quick Start Guide to Health. It's in the description with the link below. I'll see you next time.